This is a recording of the Poetry Toolbox where I will be going over the definitions using the slides and showing you the graphic organizer where you can place your notes. In the first section, I have already highlighted the keywords. As you go through the toolbox, you will be highlighting just the keywords so that you don't have to go back and read all of the definitions. You can just look at the keywords to get the general idea of the meaning of each term. So in our first section, we have prose, poetry, and verse. Prose is the form of most everyday writing, including fiction and nonfiction. In prose, words are arranged into sentences, which are arranged into paragraphs, which are arranged into chapters. If you look at the diagram or the picture in my slide, you can see that I've listed the types of prose literature. So you should select a couple, like maybe stories, creative writing, imaginative writing, and put them in the student note box. Then we have poetry, which is typically reserved for expressing something special in an artistic way. In poetry, words are arranged into lines, which are arranged into stanzas. So I would, in my student notes, is maybe just repeat parts of the definition, or maybe put the name of a poem, such as The Raven. And remember that when you write the titles of poems, you put them in quotations. Then we get to verse. Verse is part of poetry. It's the language of poetry, which is generally written with a metrical pattern or rhythm. Verse is generally composed in stanzas. So one thing that you could write in your note box is, it's when an emotion has found its thought and the thought has found words. And that is a quote from Robert Frost. Then we're going to look at forms in poetry. There are different types of stanzas based on the number of lines in each stanza. So form is the choice that a poet makes in regard to the arrangement and structure of the poem. So it's what the poem will look like, or the length or size. So a stanza is the group of lines that form a unit of meaning. So stanzas, most poems are written in lines, and the group of lines in the poem is called a stanza. And then stanzas separate ideas in a poem. They act like paragraphs that would be in prose. So for example, this poem has 2 stanzas. Types of stanzas. A couplet is 2 consecutive lines of poetry that rhyme and form a unit of meaning. In my example, I have 2 couplets from Green Eggs and Ham, and you could choose to write down one of each, or one of each of the 2 couplets. You could write, I will not eat them in a house, I do not like them with a mouse, and then you could underline the rhyme, mouse and house. A quatrain is a 4-line stanza. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. So in this quatrain, we have a rhyme scheme of A, B, C, B, because me and immortality rhyme. A sestet is a group of 6 lines that rhyme. Sestets often follow octaves in Italian sonnets. What do you call a wolf that pops out of a conscious dream, removes its way along the stream to wash up on the gulf? They say it is my spirit guide, but I can't yet decide. So in this sestet, we have an A, B, B, A, C, C rhyme scheme. Even though wolf and gulf are not a perfect rhyme, they are what's known as a slanted rhyme. Then we have octave. Octave is an 8-line stanza. So we have here Annabel Lee from Edgar Allan Poe. For the moon never beams without bringing me dreams of the beautiful Annabel Lee. And the stars never rise, but I feel the bright eyes of the beautiful Annabel Lee. And so all the night tide I lie down by the side of my darling, my life and my bride, in the sepulchre there by the sea, in her tomb by the sounding sea. If you look carefully at the different types of stanzas, a couplet is a couple, so you can think of the word two. A quatrain is a quarter, which will make you think of a 4-line stanza, sestet for 6 and octave for 8. Next, we'll look at the types of poems. We have narrative, sonnet, ode, and epic. The sonnet, or the narrative poem rather, is a poem that tells a story. And in this case, it's The Raven, because The Raven tells a story. The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. This is one stanza. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of some one gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. Only this and nothing more. And you can start to hear the rhythm of this. Then we have the sonnet. The sonnet has 2 different types. It's a 14-line poem written in iambic pentameter, which employs a specific rhyme scheme. For the Italian sonnet, we have 1 octave and then a turn or a switch in the middle and then a sestet at the end. For the Shakespearean sonnet, you get 3 quatrains, so 3 sets of 4. And then we have the turn, and then we end with a rhyming couplet, a 2-line. And you can see the difference in those rhyme schemes based on the octave and the quatrains. So for a sonnet, for an English or a Shakespearean sonnet, we have A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, G as our rhyme scheme. For the Italian sonnet, we have A, B, B, A, B, B, A, C, D, C, C, D, C as our rhyme scheme. Then we get to look at an example of an Italian sonnet. And this one is about the Statue of Liberty. Then we look at our ode. We look at our ode, and we have an ode was originally accompanied by music and dance, and it was later used by Romantic poets to convey their strongest sentiments to an event, a person, or a thing not present. So the thing that you are calling attention to and giving strong sentiments or emotions to is the subject of the poem, but it's also the audience for the poem. So for my example, Ode to Potato, we are letting the potato know how much we appreciate it. Then we have the epic poem. Epic is a long, often book-length narrative in verse form that retells the heroic journey of a single person or a group of persons. It's a long narrative poem. It's written in an elevated style. It doesn't dwell on the banal details of life. It exemplifies them. It celebrates the deed of legendary or traditional heroes. An example of an epic is Beowulf, or the Iliad, or the Odyssey. Now we're going to start looking at how to measure poetry. And in this set, we're going to learn about breaking the words into syllables, identifying stressed and unstressed syllables, identifying the syllabic pattern or the feet, counting the number of feet in a line, and then identifying the meter. So, The rhythm is the beat or pace of a poem. It's produced by a pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables, similar to when I read The Raven. Then we have meter. Meter is a recurring pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables. The unstressed syllables are marked with a whoosh, and the stressed syllables are marked with a boom, like this. So we have beneath. Beneath is whoosh, boom, beneath. And then we have Alfred, which is boom, whoosh, and it's Alfred. So we have different types of meters. So if you have a monometer, there's only 1 foot in a line of poetry. That's 1 stressed and 1 unstressed syllable in the line. A dimeter is 2 feet in a line of poetry. A trimeter is 3 feet in a line of poetry. Tetrameter is 4 feet in a line of poetry. And pentameter is 5 feet in a line of poetry. This is what we have when we have iambic pentameter. That means that there's 5 feet in a line of poetry. So we're going to look at individual feet. So the foot is the unit of measurement used to identify meter. A foot consists of 1 stressed syllable and 1 or more unstressed syllables. So that would be what you would highlight as your key words in your toolbox. So here are the types of feet, and I have them noted with dee-dum or dum-dee in the toolbox, and I have them noted in the slide as the whoosh and the boom. So an iamb is 1 stressed syllable followed by 1 unstressed syllable. Trochee is 1 stressed syllable followed by an unstressed syllable. Dactyl is 1 stressed syllable followed by 2 unstressed syllables. Anapest is 2 unstressed syllables followed by 1 stressed syllable. And spondee is 2 stressed syllables, usually used to replace an iamb or other foot for 1 measure in a line of poetry, and it's usually used for effect. So scansion is the process of analyzing or counting the metrical pattern or feet of a poem. This line would have been 10 syllables broken into 5 feet. Here is an example from Romeo and Juliet, and I'm going to read it with the stressed and unstressed syllables. But soft what light through yonder window breaks. And you can see how the unaccented syllable is marked, how the accented syllable is marked, and then in my other example with the hickory dickory dock, you can see the pattern. Hickory dickory dock, the mouse ran up the clock. The clock struck 1, down the mouse ran. Hickory dickory dock. So scansion is when you put those symbols above the words to note the rhythm pattern. So if we were going to mark up the scansion of these examples, you would have 2 households both alike in dignity, or from The Raven, once upon a midnight dreary. Then we have types of pauses in poetry. A pause is a stop in a poem. Some occur naturally at the end of lines or stanzas, but others occur within lines. The pauses within lines are often created by punctuation. Pauses create drama, emphasize feelings, and add meaning. And my notes. When we read poetry, we must be careful to read it with the punctuation the author provided. Our tendency is to pause at the end of each line when we should pause at the punctuation marks. When pauses come in the middle of the line, we call it caesura. When the line continues to the next line, we call it enjambment. We're going to look at those with a little more clarity. Caesura is a strong pause within a line of poetry marked with two parallel lines. End stopped is a line of verse in which a logical pause occurs at the end of the line, usually marked with a period, comma, or semicolon, as you can see in my example. And this example is from Romeo and Juliet. It is Romeo speaking to Juliet. Enjambment is the continuation of a thought or a sentence from one line of poetry to the next without pause. And this example is from Annabel Lee. It was many and many a year ago, pause, in a kingdom by the sea, pause, that a maiden there lived whom you may know by the name of Annabel Lee. And that's enjambment because there's no punctuation and we continue reading into the next line. We're going to be looking next at language or word choices because poetry is very planned and executed specifically with a purpose. So diction is actually the word choice. Euphony refers to the quality of being pleasing to the ear, especially through a harmonious combination of words. Most often thought to be achieved through the use of vowel sounds, and longer vowels are the most melodious. Here's an example. And walk with you through the lucent, wavering forest of blue-green leaves with its watery sun and 3 moons. Cacophony actually sounds like what it means. It refers to sounds that create a harsh and hard tones. The opposite of euphony. It's colorful, noisy, loud, and energetic like the beat of a drum or the crash of a cymbal, usually produced by combinations of words that require a staccato, explosive delivery. And my example comes from Jabberwocky. Listen for all the consonants. 'Twas brillig and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogroves and the mome raths outgrabe. So the easiest way to remember these two terms, euphony starts with a vowel and it tends to include more vowels. Cacophony starts with a consonant and tends to include more consonants. Our key sound devices are next. We have onomatopoeia. A lot of these are going to be reviewed from our toolbox of literary terms at the beginning. Onomatopoeia is the use of words that imitate sounds like hiss. Alliteration is the repetition of sounds at the beginning of words, like nibbling the noodles. Consonance is a form of alliteration, but it is literally the consonants repeating, such as from the Raven, while I nodded nearly napping, we have the end sound repeated. Poetry is all about sound and the word choice that emphasizes those sounds. Assonance, which begins with a vowel, is the repetition of vowel sounds within words, and this is from The Bells by Edgar Allan Poe. And in that line, you can see it's bolded, how they ring out their delight from the molten golden notes. You have the repetition of the O sound. We're going to pause here, and then the next video will continue on with the toolbox, the definitions, and the slides.